All right, if you clicked on this video, you probably know what we're going to be talking about today, which is a quick book review on Startup, a Silicon Valley Journey, which is, or Adventure, which is written by Jerry Kaplan. And honestly, 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, 2 thumbs up. Great book. Highly recommend for anybody who is a startup founder, who works with startup founders, who's a venture capitalist, who has desires to work in tech or be an entrepreneur of anything. If you want to start a business that's beyond just a mom and pop shop, I highly recommend getting you a copy of this book. I think they're still on Amazon. I got a used copy, I think, but great book. Real quick background on it. So Jerry Kaplan, 1987, he wants to start a pin computing. So pin, think of like the pin for the iPad or everything else. He wanted to start it back in the 80s to kind of revolutionize what was happening in the computer industry back then. He had already worked in tech for a long time. He was a graduate from Stanford. He had done a lot of, cool startup things before, but then he had this idea of, instead of having to have these big, heavy laptops that only have such limited data, and have to have a keyboard and have to have everything else, what if we could just write down all of our notes? So he was already having the idea of like a touch screen long before, what we currently have with the iPad and iPhone. So he was way ahead of his time. But it goes through this huge cycle, this process of from the 80s to early 90s, where he's raising funds, where he's running out of money, where they're hiring people, where they're putting together this band of just kind of pirates to put this thing together, where they have to work with and sometimes compete with, and sometimes at the same time work with and compete with these giants like Microsoft and Apple and IBM and AT&T. And it's so interesting because you hear these companies on the news now and like what they're doing, but when you really break it down from like a founder's perspective, and we got to negotiate this deal, and we need $10 million from this company, and this one's a loan, and this one's this way, and we got stockholders over here. It really shows kind of the complexity of raising venture capital in Silicon Valley, and like all the loopholes and all the different like potential threats towards your company if you make the wrong move. So you got to be really careful, legally. But I just want to break it down. There are a few major themes in this book that I wanted to go over. So first is really vision versus execution. Jerry had this big grand idea whenever he saw his buddy's his laptop on their jet. They were just flying together to somewhere, and he said, all right, what if we can make computing as simple as take away this whole keyboard, and all you had to do is write it down. Great idea. That's how it starts. And now, with the iPad and how successful that's been, we see like it's possible, it could have happened. Execution, though, is a very different thing. One of the first problems they ran up against was he might have just been a little bit ahead of his time. And first, there wasn't that many people who understood the technology well enough to build a large team. So he really had to find a lot of people that kind of were knowledge adjacent and understood, similar things, but having to reframe what they were working on towards this kind of new concept. And from there, you kind of launched the pin computing revolution of the 80s and early 90s before it died off for a little while and then came back with, current tech. Another issue that he came up against was all of the components that he needed for these laptops. They were just, once again, like he wasn't in the right time period for it, where, now I can go out and buy, a 2 terabyte hard drive for, $50, and it's, this big, versus back then, you might get like less than a gigabyte on the size of the whole laptop. So just the sheer amount of, I think it's Moore's law, where it's like the amount of transistors you can fit within a space, doubles every like year or 9 months or something like that. I'm butchering that. I'll put it in here so it looks better. But he just wasn't at a time period where the pen computers, making them as small as he wanted, could fit enough data to hold everything it needed to do the job right. Not only that, but there's also a weight problem where one of the big customers that they start talking to and get funding from is State Farm, and they want to help them do different insurance activities and estimates and things like that, and give one of these, I'm just going to call it's like the iPad equivalent. They wanted to give these to all of their estimators so they could go out in the field, and I think they estimated it would save like $85 million a year for State Farm if they used these instead of the typical laptops. So they wanted to do that, but the other problem was now weight, because now you have the battery, now you have the processors, now you have the CPU, now you have the screen, now you have like everything that you have to fit into this one pen computer for it to work. But one, you don't have enough processing power if you choose too small of a chip. So they had to kind of figure these things out of balancing between making it too heavy for somebody to carry around all day, every day, versus being able to fit enough battery and enough storage space and enough CPU and everything to make sure it would work properly as well every time they needed it to. So it's great, and founders should have big, grand visions, and they should, try to solve the world's problems. But sometimes you also have to be very realistic about, like, am I in the right time? Not only like for the technology to work, but also for it to be valuable. The second big major theme was kind of the role of investors. Throughout this, I swear, it's like every chapter, they're having to, hunt down investors and reach back out to old ones, and make their pitch every 6 to 9 months of, hey, we need another $10 to $20 million, and here's our valuation, and here's how much it dilutes us. And it's just stressful every single time I had to read about it. And it might have been that, it might have been all the coffee I drank while I was reading it. But it really shows the difference between a good investor, like one of their first ones they had from Kleiner Perkins, versus some of the later investments they got that had a lot of strings attached and really slowed them down from making other deals that could have potentially saved them. The next one's team dynamics. Jerry and his team did a great job of putting together, like I said, this like band of pirates, people who you've met them. There are some people that need to be told exactly what to do all day, every day, and there are some people that will just figure it out. And they did a great job finding this group of people that were passionate about this, that loved what they did, and were willing to just figure these things out on the fly. So great job in putting this team together. In one of the last chapters, they talk about, spoiler alert, the company didn't succeed. It was called Go Corporation, and unfortunately, they didn't succeed. They eventually got acquired and then shut down. But one of the last few chapters are talking about like the executives speaking to the team and talking to them about, hey, we're getting acquired, we're going through this process, about how half the crowd was just crying, and how one of the executives, told the other executives, hey guys, like, we gotta be serious right now. There's no time for crying. And then he ended up being the guy who was crying on stage. So it really, really puts you in the founder's shoes, and you really feel for it. And I didn't shed any tears, but kind of felt like it at the end of it. And if I had, it would have been justified. The last kind of major theme that this book really focuses on is competition. So obviously this is written from the founder's perspective, and because of that, you tend to view these other companies as kind of the villains of the story. So it's very interesting, reading about Bill Gates from Microsoft in the 80s and 90s, how he was kind of just always somebody you need to keep a close eye on. They let him into their office one time, and then, a few months later, Microsoft starts launching their pen computing app and saying, oh no, it's something very different. And, they get in legal battles, and Microsoft gets sued by the government, and all these different for anti-competition, roles they played. So you got Bill Gates from Microsoft, you got John Sculley from Apple. So I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this now, think Apple, they think Steve Jobs, they think Tim, I'm forgetting his name right now, the guy who's currently running Apple. But there was actually a guy named John Sculley who ran Apple for a few years, in between whenever Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple, and then between when they brought him back. So he's kind of seen as a competitor and a villain in this story because he was trying to launch the Apple Newton, which was a horrible failure in the early mid 90s. That was supposed to be their version of the pen computing processor. There's EO, which also got acquired and shut down by AT&T. AT&T kind of was trying to create their own thing, but they ended up acquiring them. It was IBM was, I think, their second investor and was supposed to be a partner that came in. Obviously, reading this from Jerry Kaplan's point of view, but they came in and all the restrictions and, red tape they were trying to put on these deals really messed all the deals up later down the line, with one of them being, it's like, we will give you this $10 million loan. However, we want you to sign over the rights to use your likeness and everything else, the look and feel of the Go pen computer, so that we can make our own product. And it was like, this is so dumb. Like, no, we're not going to, like, they objected to it, heavily of, no, we're not going to sign over the look and feel of our product so that you can just take it and make your own thing and kick us out. So it was just a complete mess, which is why it's very important to make sure that you have the right investors, not just the money, but also the incentives and like the support that you're going to get, and potential lack of competition from those people can be huge whenever it comes to raising money as a startup founder in the future. So 4 key takeaways for entrepreneurs I wanted to focus on. The first one, timing matters. Like I said earlier, one of the biggest things that hindered them was Moore's law hadn't caught up to where it needed to be for them to achieve what they wanted to in this field. Great idea. I think solid execution, terrible timing. Unfortunately, it just, from 1987 to 1993, 94, it just couldn't have happened with the tech that was happening, because like the lack of processing power, the lack of interconnectivity, the lack of Wi-Fi everywhere, like it's just, there wasn't the infrastructure for it, and like tech and the processing power hadn't caught up to where it needed to be for something like this to be successful. But like I said before, now you can see with things like the iPad and Microsoft and everybody else's tablet computing, great idea. It just wasn't at the right time. I'd actually be very interested in Jerry Kaplan's personal opinion on like current pen computing and where it's at and where he thinks it's going to go. But second takeaway is the power of storytelling. Jerry Kaplan emphasizes the importance of selling your vision, whether to investors, employees, or customers. And I can't remember who said this, but it was maybe Mark Andreessen or somebody else, but it was, one of the jobs of the CEO at a startup is not just being like Mr. Manager, but being the chief storyteller. It is your job as the CEO to set the culture of the company, but also to help tell the story of the company of, this is where the idea came from, this is where we're at now, this is where we're going in the future. Join up with me. Let's do this together. And if you've ever been a part of a startup at an early stage, it really does feel like you're part of like a band of pirates, like you're, putting something together, like you've got this secret you're hiding from the world. And that's why I love seeing, stealth startup in people's bios and LinkedIn, because you're like, what are they working on? Like, I want to find out. I want to hear what they're working on and, post it on here and, help them tell it to the world. But you really are telling a story. And like I've said before, like the type of person that is willing to bet it all on themselves, like that's a crazy person. And I love it. And I want to help those startup founders with this channel. But that's, why this channel is so important to me, is the power of storytelling. So you need to make sure that the story of, what you're doing is told well, because I think that's honestly half the sales process. I think most sales deals as well are done not because somebody has better or worse tech, but because somebody is better at communicating their story and the value that they bring to the table. So if you're a CEO or want to be a founder, learn how to tell a good story. The next one is resilience. I swear, every chapter is just ups and downs and ups and downs. And that's why I love this book, because honestly, it's so great at like making you feel like a startup founder in like 80s, 90s Silicon Valley, where it's just, actually it was Mark Andreessen who said startup founders have two emotions. That's euphoria and terror. And it really does go back and forth between those two of, great, we raised the round. All right, this gives us 6 months of runway. Can we get the product out in time? No. All right, we're going to have to raise another round. Okay, we're running out of like funds. Like it's just one thing after the next. Before they do their first demonstration to the public of what the pin computer can do, they have I think they had 3 prototypes they were working on. 2 of them burnt out, but they had just enough parts. Oh, didn't mean to do that. They had just enough parts to salvage one of them. And because of that, they like put all those parts into the last one, and they fired it up the night before they were supposed to go on stage at this big IBM, show to tell the world what they were working on, about their partnership, and show off pen computing to the world for the first time. And it finally worked. Like the night, like probably the morning of, at like 2 a.m, the same day they were supposed to do it. They fly to, I think, San Francisco or New York, one of them, I forget. There's a lot of traveling in this book. At the end, they're going to like Japan every week too. But they go somewhere for the big pitch, and they find out the cable they need to plug the computer in so that it works isn't long enough to reach the power source. So they have to go out and like find somebody whose shop is open and buy one that night. And they spend, I think, who is it? Somebody who was a friend of theirs from IBM works with them to like keep the crew overnight at the venue, and they pay them to like stay there overnight and figure everything out so that in the morning, whenever they do the demo, it works. And I think this was only the second time they had booted it up. And one of their chief technology person, she told them, like, do not turn this on until it's demo time, because we don't know if it's going to work, and we don't know, like, and if it does work for a demo beforehand, we don't know if you have a second shot. So everything is very just figuring it out on the fly, day of, lots of long nights, lots of 36 hours of like no sleep to just press that button, and it worked. And the technology industry like exploded because of that, of look what's happening. So nothing but euphoria and terror. Loved it. And the last kind of takeaway I wanted to focus on was learning from failures. Like I said before, unfortunately, they failed. It didn't work. They ended up getting acquired by AT&T and going through this whole negotiation with EO, and they were both acquired. And some of the investors were kind of let down, but they were like, you know what, you're a great guy. Let us know next time you're starting up something. So the 2 big takeaways from learning from failure are, 1, taking care of your people. If you're going to fail well, and don't burn bridges that don't need to be burnt, because the next time you need to go and raise funds, people are going to remember, oh, that's the guy, who, when things were going bad, they completely flipped out and broke down. They did a really good job of negotiating, the jobs for the people that were working for them. I think they had over 200 people working at Go before they finished. But they got them all jobs at AT&T. Unfortunately, AT&T cut their jobs a few months later, but what can you do about that? So fail well, learn from it. He took some time off, and then I think it was like he took a year off, wrote this book, and then after that, he started another company with somebody else, and I think that one did a lot better and eventually got acquired, but I would need to look deeper into that. The last kind of piece of this book is it gives you a good kind of glimpse into Silicon Valley culture. I'm sure, anybody who is in the startup world, who is into VC, who's into entrepreneurship, who's into tech, you've probably watched the show Silicon Valley on HBO, and you probably listened to a few podcasts like the Founders Podcast or the All In Podcast. There's a few kind of key things that a lot of these people in this sphere tend to all do. And one thing is you tend to hear from people like Mark Andreessen and people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all these big founders of well, back in the day, this is what VC and this is what startup founders and this is what everything was like in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when you're investing in things like LinkedIn, Facebook, Yahoo. Like further and further you go back, So it's just interesting to hear that, and you kind of get a glimpse of what, Silicon Valley culture became. And there seems to be these kind of periods in Silicon Valley history from the 50s, 60s, 70s, where most of it's like government and military investment that really got these first companies up and going. Like IBM was one of that first wave, and then there's people from that first wave. They exited, they got their stock options, they made their money, and then they were either able to do two things of invest in the next generation or go and start their own next thing of, I worked at IBM for 10 years, but I had this idea, I'm going to go start this company. And then they went off and they did that. One of the most prominent examples is the PayPal mafia. You've got Peter Thiel, you've got Elon Musk, you've got, I'm blanking on his name right now, the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. You got Reid Hoffman. You got so many other guys who ended up, after they exited from PayPal, they branched off, and almost most of them went off and started their own companies, and they all were very successful and they used that money they made from that one exit to go and start these next ones. And now people who have worked at those are branching off and going and starting their own startups. So you kind of got this second wave of like 80s, 90s startups in Silicon Valley that you get to see this glimpse of and how they're starting and hear these people of that are now very famous. So if nothing else, it's kind of a time traveling book as well. So all in all, great book. Kind of key takeaways to focus on, like I said earlier, timing is crucial, resilience matters, storytelling wins, and learn from your failures as well. And then just a great book. I have nothing but good things to say about this. It's definitely going up on the bookshelf. Actually, I keep all my business books here in the office, so it's going probably right behind me for the rest of this semester. And I hope to reread this in a few years and kind of get, reignited. If nothing else, it made me want to go and start something else myself. So highly recommend. Once again, awesome book. Get you a copy yourself. Next one I'm going to reread, which actually that was the first time I read that one, but I'm going to reread Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Awesome book. It's definitely in my top 10 of all time, but it's also been a number of years since I've read it. So I'll be going through this, and in a few months, I'll put up a book review of this one and my key takeaways. So that's all I got today from Startup Vagabond. Have a great day, and I'll see you around.